7, her stepmother hissed, her champagne flute trembling. 7 public rejections, Olivia. Do you understand what this makes you? Olivia kept her eyes on the marble floor. The whispers of the ballroom closed in around her like a physical weight. Unwanted. A liability. Julian just walked away. Her stepmother continued, venom dripping from every word. That's it. Nobody wants a broken piece. Then the heavy oak doors groaned open. The string quartet stumbled to a halt. A man stood in the threshold, mud on his heavy boots, a weathered canvas jacket over broad, rigid shoulders. He didn't belong in this world of silk and deceit. But as the room fell dead silent, he ignored the perfect elites, walking straight past them all. Toward her, the grand ballroom of the Sterling estate was designed to intimidate. Vaulted ceilings painted with faux Renaissance frescoes loomed over a sea of imported orchids and crystal chandeliers. It was a place where fortunes were merged and bloodlines were curated. Tonight, it felt like an execution chamber. Olivia stood near a towering column of white marble, the cold stone pressing against her bare spine. Her dress, a breathless slip of midnight blue silk, felt less like armor and more like a shroud. She was 26, an age when the daughters of the city's elite were expected to be safely anchored to a hedge fund manager or an heir. Instead, she was the room's most tragic spectacle. Just minutes ago, Julian Vance, the heir to a shipping empire, had handed her back her evening wrap in front of 300 guests. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't caused a scene. He had simply leaned in, his breath smelling of gin and peppermint, and murmured, "My father won't allow it, Olivia. The optics, you understand." Then he had turned his back and vanished into the crowd of vultures. Rejection number 7. It wasn't just Julian. It was the 6 men before him over the past 3 years. The lawyer who had abruptly stopped calling. The tech CEO who had left her sitting at a Michelin-starred restaurant. The childhood friend who had apologetically explained that his family needed a merger, not a charity case. Each time, the social circle had watched. Each time, the invisible scarlet letter on her chest grew brighter. "Look at her." A voice carried over the clinking of ice in crystal glasses. Olivia didn't need to turn her head to know it was Eleanor Pierce, a woman whose smile was sharper than a scalpel. It's genuinely pathetic. She thought Vance would look past the bankruptcy. Olivia's chest tightened. The air in the room was suddenly too thick, perfumed heavily with expensive lilies and suffocating arrogance. She dug her manicured nails into her palms, praying for the floor to open and swallow her whole. Beside her, Caroline, her stepmother, looked ready to shatter her glass. Caroline was a woman who measured her worth by the men attached to her family name. Olivia's late father had left them with a ruined legacy, and Caroline had spent every waking hour trying to auction Olivia off to salvage their status. "I can't be seen with you right now," Caroline whispered, her voice tight, barely moving her meticulously painted lips. "Stay in this corner. Do not speak to anyone. Do not cry. I have to go do damage control before the entire board thinks we're infected." Before Olivia could reply, Caroline pivoted on her stiletto heels and blended into the glittering crowd, leaving Olivia entirely alone. The isolation was a physical pressure, pressing against her eardrums. She stared blindly at the champagne bubbling in a glass on a passing waiter's tray. Just walk out, her mind screamed. Run. But where would she go? The estate was miles from the city, nestled deep in the foothills of the Blackwood Range. The sprawling, jagged mountains loomed outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, dark and indifferent to the petty dramas of the billionaires drinking beneath them. Suddenly, a sharp, dissonant sound echoed through the cavernous room. The heavy oak doors at the grand entrance didn't just open. They were shoved apart with a force that made the brass hinges shriek. The polite, ambient chatter of 300 socialites died instantly. The string quartet, mid-Vivaldi, faltered into a screeching halt as the cellist dropped his bow. Olivia forced her gaze up from the floor. A man stood in the archway. He was a violent disruption to the curated perfection of the room. He was tall, easily 6'4", with shoulders that seemed to eclipse the light from the hallway behind him. He wore dark, heavy denim and a waxed canvas jacket that bore the faint, damp stains of the forest. Mud clung to the heavy treads of his leather boots, a stark desecration of the pristine white marble. His face was a landscape of harsh angles, shadowed by a thick, dark beard and hair that looked as though it had been raked back by the wind. Not a comb. But it was his eyes that froze the room. They were pale, startlingly sharp, and scanned the crowd with a predator's cold calculation. He didn't look impressed. He looked annoyed. A collective breath hitched in the ballroom. No one moved. No security guard rushed forward. The host of the party, Marcus Sterling, a man who routinely fired executives for wearing the wrong tie, stood frozen near the bar, his face draining of color. Olivia watched, her pulse drumming a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The man stepped fully into the light. He carried the scent of pine needles, wood smoke, and freezing rain. A raw, wild scent that cut right through the cloying perfumes of the room. He wasn't lost. He wasn't a trespasser who had stumbled in by mistake. He was looking for someone. And as his pale, striking eyes swept over the glittering, terrified crowd, they locked directly, unmistakably, onto Olivia. The silence in the Sterling ballroom was absolute, heavy enough to crack glass. The man took a step forward. The dull, heavy thud of his muddy boot against the marble echoed like a gunshot. He began to walk. As he moved, the crowd, billionaires, senators, and socialites, parted instinctively. They shrank back, pulling their silk gowns and tailored tuxedos out of his path as if he were a blazing fire sweeping through dry brush. The air around him crackled with a raw, kinetic energy. It wasn't just his size, it was the way he moved. There was no hesitation, no awe at the opulence surrounding him. He moved with the quiet, lethal grace of an apex predator, traversing its own territory. Whispers finally ignited behind him, sharp and frantic. Is that him? Good God. What is he doing down from the ridge? Don't look at him, Eleanor. Olivia stood paralyzed. Her back remained pressed against the cold column. She watched as women who, moments ago, had been preening for Julian Vance, now visibly recoiled. Yet, beneath their fear, Olivia caught the hungry, curious stares of the heiresses. He was rugged, dangerous, and entirely out of their reach. Several women subtly shifted, hoping to catch his eye as he passed. He didn't spare them a single glance. He walked past Clara Bowden, the cosmetics billionaire. He walked past the governor's daughter, who was wearing a diamond necklace worth more than a small country. He walked past Julian Vance, who actually took a physical step backward, bumping into a waiter in his haste to get out of the way. The man's eyes never left Olivia. Her heart hammered violently in her throat. She gripped the fabric of her blue dress, her knuckles turning white. Why is he looking at me? She thought, panic rising. Does he know my father? Is this another debt? Another humiliation? He stopped. He was less than 2 feet away from her. Up close, the sheer scale of him was overwhelming. The top of Olivia's head barely reached his collarbone. The scent of him, crushed pine, cold earth, and rain, was intoxicating, grounding her racing thoughts in a way the sterile air of the ballroom never could. For a long, agonizing second, they just looked at each other. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, pale gray rimmed with dark blue. There were fine lines at the corners of his eyes, etched by sun and wind, not by stress and boardroom meetings. His jaw was clenched, a muscle feathering beneath his beard. "You're shaking," he said. His voice was a deep, gravelly baritone that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered loud enough for the closest eavesdroppers to hear. Olivia swallowed hard, fighting to keep her voice steady. "It's cold in here." A faint, almost imperceptible smirk touched the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a cruel smile. "It's a tomb in here," he corrected, his gaze flickering briefly to the staring crowd before snapping back to her. "And they're burying you alive," Olivia gasped softly, the brutal honesty of his words hitting her like a physical blow. She glanced around. The entire room was watching them. Julian was staring, his mouth slightly open. Caroline was frozen halfway across the room, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and confusion. "I don't know who you are," Olivia managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm Liam," he said simply. He didn't offer a last name. In this room, where lineage and titles were everything, he offered nothing but himself. "Liam?" she repeated, the name tasting foreign and heavy on her tongue. "What do you want?" "To know if you're going to stand here and let them finish the job," Liam replied, his pale eyes intensely focused on hers. "Or if you're going to walk out of that door with me." The room seemed to tilt. Olivia felt a dizzying rush of adrenaline. Walk out with him? A total stranger. A man who looked like he could tear the building down with his bare hands. "I can't just leave," she whispered, her ingrained social conditioning fighting against the desperate urge to flee. "My stepmother." The event. "Your stepmother is currently calculating how much this scene will cost her," Liam said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming intimate, meant only for her. "And the man who just walked away from you is a coward. You owe these people nothing, Olivia." She flinched. He knew her name. He knew what Julian had just done. Liam didn't wait for her to process it. He slowly raised his hand, offering it to her. His palm was broad, heavily calloused, scarred. The hand of a man who worked the earth, who built things, who fought. It was the complete antithesis of the soft, manicured hands that had rejected her for the past 3 years. 7 times is enough," Liam said quietly, the words striking the deepest, most agonizing chord in her chest. "Let them stare at something else." Olivia looked from his scarred, open hand to his steady, unyielding eyes. She looked past him, catching sight of Julian's sneer and Caroline's furious glare. They expected her to break. They expected her to slink into the shadows and disappear. Slowly, her hand trembling, Olivia reached out. When her slender, pale fingers met his, Liam's grip was instant, firm, and undeniably protective. A jolt of electricity shot up her arm. "Hold on," Liam murmured. Without another word, he turned, keeping her hand securely in his, and began to lead her back through the parted sea of the elite. The walk back to the heavy oak doors felt like moving through a dream. Olivia's mind was entirely blank, short-circuited by the sheer audacity of what was happening. Every eye in the Sterling ballroom was fixed upon them. The silence was absolute, save for the heavy rhythm of Liam's boots and the soft, terrified rustle of Olivia's silk gown trailing behind him. "Olivia!" The sharp, shrill voice sliced through the tension. Caroline had finally unfrozen. She pushed past a waiter, her face flushed red beneath her powdered makeup. "Olivia, stop right there! What do you think you are doing?" Caroline hissed, though her voice carried across the marble hall. "You do not know this person. You are making a spectacle of us." Liam didn't break his stride, but he slightly adjusted his grip on Olivia's hand, pulling her half a step behind his massive frame, shielding her from Caroline's line of sight. He didn't even look at the older woman. Olivia, if you walk out those doors, do not bother coming back to the estate. Caroline threatened, her voice pitching into genuine panic. I will not let you ruin what little we have left. Olivia's steps faltered. The threat was real. Caroline controlled the meager trust fund that kept a roof over Olivia's head. Stepping over that threshold meant total, irreversible ruin. Sensing her hesitation, Liam stopped just inches from the doorway. He turned to look down at her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were a storm of intent. He didn't pull her, he didn't force her. He simply waited. Olivia looked back at Caroline, then at Julian Vance, who was watching with a mixture of disdain and bizarre jealousy. She saw the faces of the people who had judged her, measured her, and found her lacking. 7 times. She looked back up at Liam. The scent of pine and rain was stronger now. I have nothing left to ruin, Olivia said, her voice finally finding its strength. Liam's jaw flexed. Good. He pushed the heavy oak doors open with his free hand, and they stepped out into the night. The contrast was violent. The ballroom had been suffocatingly warm and perfumed. The outside air was a shock of freezing, violent wind cutting down from the Blackwood peaks. A storm was brewing, the sky bruised purple and black. Liam led her down the sweeping stone steps of the mansion. At the bottom, idling aggressively on the manicured circular driveway, sat a massive, matte black, heavy-duty truck. It looked like a military vehicle compared to the sleek Bentleys and Maybachs parked nearby. The engine rumbled with a deep, throaty growl. He opened the passenger door for her. The interior was surprisingly warm, smelling of rich, worn leather, black coffee, and earth. Olivia climbed in, pulling her silk skirt around her legs. Liam shut the door with a solid, heavy thud, sealing her inside the quiet cabin. A moment later, he swung into the driver's seat. He didn't speak. He shifted the truck into gear, and the massive vehicle surged forward, crunching over the gravel driveway and leaving the glowing, opulent prison of the Sterling estate behind. For the first 10 minutes, the silence in the cab was deafening. Olivia's adrenaline began to crash, leaving behind a cold, creeping dread. She was in a truck with a strange man, driving up a winding, treacherous mountain road in the dark. She rubbed her bare arms, shivering despite the blast of the heater. There's a blanket behind your seat, Liam said, his eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. The headlights cut through the thickening fog. Olivia twisted around, grabbing a heavy wool blanket. She wrapped it tightly over her shoulders. It smelled like him. Thank you. More silence. The truck climbed higher, the road narrowing as they ascended into the dense, ancient pines of the Blackwood Range. You knew about Julian, Olivia said softly, unable to bear the quiet any longer. You knew about the other 6. You knew my name. Liam downshifted as they took a sharp, hairpin turn. His massive hands handled the steering wheel with effortless precision. Everyone in that valley knows about you, Olivia. So you came to watch the show? She asked, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. To see the ruined girl get humiliated one more time? Liam's foot eased off the gas. He turned his head, locking those pale, piercing eyes on her for a long, heavy second. The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. I came to stop it, he said quietly. Why? Olivia demanded, her voice cracking. You don't know me. You don't know what happened with my father's company. You don't know that I'm broke, that I know exactly what happened to your father. Liam interrupted, his voice dropping into a dangerous, gravelly register. I know he was framed by Marcus Sterling. I know you took the social fall to keep Caroline out of prison. And I know that for the past 3 years, you've been letting a room full of cowards make you feel like you're the one who's broken. Olivia froze. Her heart stopped. No one knew that. That was the deepest, darkest secret of the bankruptcy. The secret she had buried to protect her family, even as they discarded her. "How?" she whispered, her eyes wide in the dim light of the dashboard. "Who are you?" Liam turned his attention back to the road as a massive pair of iron gates emerged from the fog ahead. They were rusted, ancient, and flanked by towering stone pillars built into the side of the mountain. As the truck approached, the heavy gates groaned open automatically. "My name is Liam Thorne," he said, his voice flat. Olivia's blood ran cold. The Thornes, the urban legends of the valley. The reclusive family that owned the entire upper half of the Blackwood Range. The billionaires who refused to play the social games, who held more wealth in land and minerals than Marcus Sterling could ever dream of. They were notoriously private. Some called them savages. Others called them royalty. "You're a thorn," she breathed. Liam drove through the gates, the tires turning from asphalt to raw, packed dirt. "And as of tonight," Liam said, his jaw setting as a massive, modern fortress of glass, steel, and stone appeared through the trees, "you are under my protection. Welcome to the mountain, Olivia." The Thorne estate did not look like a home. It looked like a stronghold carved directly out of the mountain's jagged spine. As Liam brought the heavy truck to a halt on the stone-paved courtyard, the storm finally broke. Rain slammed against the windshield in violent, icy sheets, obscuring the massive structure of glass, blackened steel, and native timber that loomed before them. "Stay here," Liam commanded, his voice slicing through the roar of the downpour. Before Olivia could protest, he was out of the truck. He didn't run. He walked through the torrential rain with the same unhurried, predatory grace he had displayed in the ballroom, as if the elements themselves dared not rush him. A moment later, her door was pulled open. The wind howled, instantly biting through her thin silk dress. Liam didn't give the cold a chance to settle into her bones. He stripped off his heavy, waxed canvas jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The coat was massive, swallowing her entirely, and it radiated his intense body heat. "Come on," he said, wrapping a thick arm around her waist and pulling her against his side to shield her from the worst of the wind. They moved quickly up the wide stone steps. When Liam pushed open the massive front door, they stepped into absolute, breathless silence. The heavy door slammed shut, cutting off the storm's fury like a severed nerve. Olivia stood dripping in the foyer, shivering despite the heavy jacket. She looked around, her eyes widening. There were no Renaissance frescoes here, no crystal chandeliers or imported orchids. The Thorne house was a cathedral of raw nature. Massive timber beams arched overhead, framing floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the black, violent abyss of the valley below. The floors were polished dark stone, and a fireplace large enough to stand in dominated the far wall of the sunken living room. It was intimidating, beautiful, and utterly isolated. "There are no staff," Liam said, watching her take in the empty space. He ran a hand through his wet, dark hair, pushing it back from his face. "If you're expecting a maid to draw you a bath, you're out of luck." "I'm not expecting anything," Olivia said quietly. Her voice trembled, though whether from the cold or the adrenaline crash, she couldn't tell. Liam's pale gray eyes softened by a fraction of a degree. He walked over to the massive fireplace, grabbed a heavy iron poker, and within moments, coaxed a roaring blaze from the embers. The firelight cast long, dancing shadows across his sharp jawline. "Through that hall, second door on the left, is a guest suite," he said, not looking back at her as he stacked another thick log onto the grate. "There's a hot shower. You'll find some clean clothes in the dresser. They won't be silk, but they'll be dry." Olivia clutched the lapels of his oversized jacket. The scent of him, wood smoke and rain, was anchored deep in the fabric. "Why did you bring me here, Liam?" she asked, the question finally bursting past her lips. "You said you knew about my father. You said you came to stop the humiliation. But the Thorns don't get involved in society drama. So why me?" Liam turned slowly. The fire illuminated the imposing breadth of his chest, the wet fabric of his dark Henley clinging to his muscles. He looked at her, standing small and ruined in her soaked, midnight blue gown, shivering in his coat. "Because, Olivia," he said, his voice dropping to a low, rough rumble that sent a fresh shiver down her spine. "You are the only person in that entire valley who doesn't know what you're actually worth." He didn't elaborate. He simply gestured toward the hallway. "Shower. We'll talk when you aren't turning blue." She wanted to press him, to demand answers. But a violent shudder racked her body, betraying her exhaustion. She nodded once, turning on her heel. As she walked down the dimly lit, wood-paneled hallway, she could feel his eyes on her. Heavy, calculating, and intensely protective. She was in the belly of the beast, cut off from the only world she knew. But for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel hunted. She felt guarded. When Olivia woke, the room was flooded with piercing, brilliant sunlight. She blinked against the glare, disoriented by the profound silence. There was no hum of city traffic, no distant chatter of the estate staff. She pushed herself up against the headboard of the massive, custom-built bed. The clothes Liam had promised were folded neatly at the foot of the mattress. A pair of soft, worn-in gray sweatpants and a thick, charcoal Henley that clearly belonged to him. She dressed quickly. The clothes dwarfed her, the sleeves of the shirt hanging past her fingertips. But the soft cotton felt like a shield against the memory of the tight, restrictive silk from the night before. She padded barefoot out of the bedroom. The house was entirely different in the daylight. The storm had washed the world clean, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a staggering, vertigo-inducing view of the Blackwood Range. They were literally above the cloud line, the jagged peaks breaking through a sea of white mist like islands in the sky. She found Liam in the kitchen. It was an industrial, utilitarian space of brushed steel and dark wood. He was standing at the island, a topographic map spread out before him, a steaming mug of black coffee in his hand. He had changed into dry jeans and a fitted black t-shirt, revealing arms corded with lean, functional muscle. He looked up as she entered. His pale eyes swept over her, taking in his clothes hanging off her slender frame. A muscle feathered in his jaw, and he quickly looked back down at the map. "Coffee is in the pot," he said, his tone brisk, strictly business. Olivia poured herself a cup, wrapping her cold hands around the warm ceramic. She walked to the opposite side of the island, facing him. The hesitation from the night before was gone, replaced by a burning, desperate need for the truth. "You said I don't know what I'm worth," she started, her voice steady. "Tell me. Because right now, my bank account is overdrawn, my trust is frozen by my stepmother, and I am a social pariah." Liam set his mug down with a heavy thud. He leaned forward, planting his large hands flat on the map, effectively bridging the distance between them. "Marcus Sterling didn't just ruin your father out of spite, Olivia," Liam said, his voice devoid of any pity. "Your father owned something Sterling wanted, something he still wants." "My father lost everything," she countered, shaking her head. "The bankruptcy wiped us out. Every property, every patent, every stock." "Not everything," Liam corrected smoothly. He tapped a specific, highlighted ridge on the topographic map. He hid something. A parcel of land, right here, sitting dead center in the pass where Sterling is trying to build his new luxury resort and private highway. Without this land, Sterling's billion-dollar project is entirely dead in the water. Olivia stared at the map, her pulse beginning to race. I don't own any land. You do, Liam said, his gaze locking onto hers, fierce and uncompromising. It's in a blind trust. The Elias Trust. It activates upon your 27th birthday or upon your marriage. The words hit her like a physical blow. The air in her lungs vanished. My marriage, she whispered, her mind spinning backward. The pressure from Caroline to get married. The relentless setup of dates. The sudden, intense interest from Julian Vance, a man whose father was a major investor in Sterling's company. Julian wasn't going to marry you for love, and he wasn't rejecting you out of social pressure, Liam said brutally, stripping away the last of the illusions. He rejected you last night because Sterling told him to back out. They found a legal loophole. If you are deemed socially and financially unstable, a pariah, exactly as they've painted you, Caroline can petition the court to dissolve the trust early and take control as your guardian. Olivia took a step back, her hands trembling so violently that coffee spilled over the rim of her mug, burning her knuckles. She didn't feel the pain. Caroline knew. Olivia breathed, the betrayal carving a hollow cavity into her chest. She orchestrated the rejections. She made sure I failed every time. She was trying to break me. Yes, Liam said softly. They were trying to break you so you would surrender the only piece of power you have left. The silence that followed Liam's revelation was heavy, thick with the wreckage of Olivia's entire reality. She turned away from him, walking toward the massive glass window. She stared out at the jagged peaks, but she wasn't seeing them. She was seeing the past 3 years of her life. The tears she had cried in empty bathroom stalls, the panic attacks before charity galas, the crushing, suffocating belief that she was fundamentally unlovable, broken, and worthless. It was all a calculated, boardroom-orchestrated lie. A choked, ragged breath escaped her lips. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the sudden, overwhelming urge to shatter. Then, she felt the heat of him. Liam had moved silently across the room. He didn't touch her, but he stood just inches behind her, his large frame acting as a solid, immovable wall against the storm raging in her mind. Are you going to cry? Liam asked. His voice wasn't cruel. It was challenging, a rough baritone that vibrated in the quiet room. Olivia opened her eyes. The reflection in the glass showed the two of them. The broken socialite swallowed in oversized clothes, and the Mountain King standing guard behind her. I've spent 3 years crying, Olivia whispered, her voice hardening, the sorrow rapidly calcifying into a cold, blinding rage. I'm done. She turned to face him. They were impossibly close. She had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. The scent of him, pine, coffee, and clean male sweat, filled her senses. Good, Liam said, a spark of dangerous approval flashing in his pale eyes. Because Sterling will know you're gone by now. When he finds out you walked out with me, he'll know the Elias Trust is compromised. He is going to come for you. Then what do we do? She asked, her chin lifting in defiance. We fight, Liam replied simply. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing against her hand to take the cooling mug of coffee from her trembling grip. The brief contact sent a jolt of electricity straight to her core. He set the mug on a nearby side table and looked back down at her. You stay here, on the mountain, he instructed, his tone shifting from informative to commanding. You are under my roof now. Sterling's lawyers, Caroline's threats, none of it crosses my property line. I have my own attorneys digging into the trust right now. We secure the land, we put it entirely in your name, and we watch Sterling's empire bleed. Olivia searched his face. It was a face carved from stone, unyielding and harsh. Yet, beneath the rugged exterior, there was a fierce, protective honor that she had never encountered in the gilded ballrooms of the valley. "Why are you doing this, Liam?" she asked, her voice dropping to a soft, vulnerable whisper. "You could have just bought the land from me. You could have let them break me and picked up the pieces. Why become a target for my sake?" Liam's jaw tightened. The air between them seemed to thicken, the proximity suddenly charging with a different, more complex tension. His eyes dropped to her lips for a fraction of a second before snapping back up to hers. "Because a long time ago, your father was the only man in that valley who didn't look at my family like we were animals," Liam said quietly, the raw truth bleeding through his stoic facade. "He owed me nothing, but he showed me respect. I am repaying that debt." He paused, taking a deliberate half-step closer, completely eliminating the space between them. "And because," Liam murmured, his voice dropping into a dark, mesmerizing gravel, "I watched a room full of cowards try to break you for 3 years. And I decided I wasn't going to let them succeed." Chapter 7. The Siege of Blackwood. The confrontation didn't take days to materialize. It took barely 48 hours. Olivia was standing on the sprawling cedar deck, wrapping around the Thorne estate, watching the morning mist burn off the Blackwood peaks, when the distant crunch of heavy tires broke the mountain's silence. She gripped the wooden railing. Far below, navigating the treacherous switchbacks, a convoy of 3 sleek, black SUVs was making its way toward the iron gates. They looked absurdly out of place against the rugged, untamed wilderness, like polished beetles crawling over a sleeping bear. The sliding glass door behind her opened. Liam stepped out, holding a thermos of coffee. He didn't look surprised. He wore a heavy flannel shirt rolled to the elbows and work boots, looking every inch the undisputed lord of the mountain. "Sterling?" Olivia asked, her voice tight but surprisingly steady. "Sterling, Caroline, and likely half a dozen corporate lawyers who have never seen a dirt road in their lives," Liam replied. He set the thermos on a patio table. "The gate is locked, but they'll try to serve papers. You don't have to come down. Stay here." Olivia looked at him. 3 days ago, she would have hidden. 3 days ago, the mere thought of Caroline's sharp, disapproving glare would have sent her spiraling into a panic attack. But the air up here was different. The heavy, oversized wool sweater of Liam's that she wore felt like armor. "No," Olivia said, her chin lifting. "I'm done hiding. If they want to look at me, they can look me in the eye." A slow, deeply satisfied smile touched the corner of Liam's mouth. It was a fierce expression, one that made her heart skip a beat. "All right then, walk with me." They descended the long, winding dirt driveway together. By the time they reached the towering, rusted iron gates, the SUVs had parked. Men in tailored 3-piece suits were already stepping out into the mud, looking around with open disdain. Marcus Sterling, a man whose silver hair and sharp, predatory features had intimidated boardrooms for decades, stood at the front. Beside him was Caroline, wearing a beige cashmere coat and looking utterly appalled by the surroundings. "Open the gate, Thorne," Sterling barked, his voice carrying an unearned authority. "This isn't the Wild West. You are harboring an unstable, dependent young woman, and we have a court-ordered psychiatric hold for her." Caroline stepped forward, clutching her designer bag. "Olivia, look at you. You look like a vagrant. This little tantrum has gone far enough. Come to the car immediately. We have a doctor waiting in the city to help you through this episode." Olivia felt a momentary spike of the old terror, a phantom weight pressing on her chest. They were trying to institutionalize her, They were going to declare her legally incompetent to force the dissolution of the Elias Trust. Before she could speak, Liam stepped smoothly in front of her. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't posture. He simply stood on his side of the iron bars, a mountain of quiet, lethal violence. The only people trespassing on private property right now are you, Marcus, Liam said, his voice a low, gravelly hum that carried perfectly in the cold air. If one of your shiny Italian loafers touches the dirt on my side of this gate, I won't bother calling the sheriff. I'll handle the eviction myself. Sterling sneered, though he instinctively took a half-step back. Spare me the lumberjack routine. I have a judge's signature right here. Olivia Elias is not of sound mind to manage her affairs or her trust. If she doesn't come with us, the sheriff will be up here in an hour with a battering ram. Let me see it, Olivia said, stepping out from behind Liam. Caroline scoffed. Olivia, be quiet. You are embarrassing yourself. I said, let me see it. Olivia repeated, her voice ringing out, sharp and clear. She looked directly at Caroline, dropping the deferential mask she had worn for years. You sold me out, Caroline. You spent 3 years making sure I was rejected in public so you could build a case that I was emotionally unstable. All for a cut of Marcus's resort. Caroline's face went pale, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. Sterling narrowed his eyes. It doesn't matter what you think you know, little girl. The trust stipulates that control defaults to your guardian if you are deemed unfit, or until you marry. And since Julian Vance and every other respectable man in the city had the good sense to walk away from you, you are out of options. The land is mine. Liam reached out, his large, calloused hand wrapping securely around Olivia's. The heat of his skin sent a jolt of pure adrenaline straight to her core. He looked at Sterling, his pale gray eyes colder than the winter sky. She isn't out of options, Liam said quietly. Your injunction is useless. The Elias Trust is already locked. Sterling laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Locked? By what mechanism, Thorne? Liam didn't look at the billionaire. He turned his head, looking down at Olivia. The intensity in his gaze stripped the breath from her lungs. It wasn't a look of protection anymore. It was a look of absolute, unyielding possession. By the marriage clause, Liam said. Dead silence fell over the gate. The wind whistled through the ancient pines, mocking the sudden, frozen shock on Sterling and Caroline's faces. You're lying, Caroline hissed, her composure shattering. She was with Julian 3 days ago. You cannot just magically produce a marriage license. My attorneys filed the paperwork in the state capitol at 8 a.m. this morning, Liam replied, his voice completely level. A private ceremony, fully legally binding. Olivia is a Thorne now. Her assets, including the Elias Trust, are merged with the Thorne estate. And my lawyers have infinitely deeper pockets than yours, Marcus. Olivia stared at Liam, her mind spinning wildly. A private ceremony? He had sent his lawyers. He had drawn up the papers. He had done it all to build an impenetrable fortress around her. But as she looked up into his face, she saw the subtle tension in his jaw. This wasn't just a legal maneuver to him. He was putting his family's legendary name, their untouched wealth, entirely on the line for her. Sterling's face turned a dangerous, mottled red. You think you can play me? You think a sham marriage is going to hold up in court? I will tie you up in litigation for the next decade. Do it. Liam challenged, his voice dropping into a dark, terrifying register. Drag us to court, Marcus. Let's open the books. Let's subpoena the communications between you and Julian Vance. Let's put Caroline on the stand and ask her about the kickbacks you promised her for sabotaging her stepdaughter. Let's see what happens to your publicly traded stock when the SEC finds out you've been colluding to defraud a vulnerable heiress. Sterling went entirely still. The bluster evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard calculus of a cornered businessman. He knew Liam was right. A protracted legal battle would expose the rot at the foundation of his billion-dollar resort project. It would ruin him. "This isn't over," Sterling said, though the threat lacked any real heat. He turned on his heel, marching back toward his SUV. Caroline lingered for a second, looking at Olivia through the iron bars. "You're making a mistake," she whispered, venom dripping from her words. "He's a savage. He doesn't want you. He just wants to beat Marcus." Olivia looked at the woman who had made her life a living hell for 3 years. She felt no anger anymore, only pity. "Goodbye, Caroline," Olivia said, her voice impossibly calm. "Don't ever contact me again." Caroline's face crumpled into a mask of bitter defeat. She turned and fled to the cars. Less than a minute later, the convoy was reversing down the mountain, their retreat absolute and humiliating. Olivia stood at the gate, listening until the sound of the engines faded into the wind. The silence rushed back in, heavy and profound. Her hand was still wrapped in Liam's. She slowly looked up at him. "You married me," she said, the words feeling surreal on her tongue. "I did," Liam said. He finally released her hand, though he didn't step away. "The papers are on the kitchen island. I signed them before I came out. All you have to do is sign your name, and it's done. The land is safe. You're safe." Olivia searched his eyes. "And if I don't sign them? If I just want to walk away now that they've backed off?" Liam's expression hardened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. He looked away, staring out at the empty road. "Then I'll have my lawyers dissolve the contract quietly. You can take the land and go wherever you want. I won't keep you here against your will, Olivia." The thought of leaving the mountain, of leaving him, sent a sudden, sharp ache through her chest. The city, the ballrooms, the polite society. It all felt like a suffocating cage. The only place she had breathed freely in 3 years was right here, in the shadow of this rugged, impossible man. "I don't want to leave," she said softly. Liam turned his head back to her, his breath hitching slightly. "Let's go back to the house," Olivia said, a small, genuine smile breaking across her face for the first time in years. "I have a contract to sign." The sun had long set, casting the Thorne estate into a sanctuary of deep shadows and warm firelight. Olivia sat at the kitchen island, staring at the thick stack of legal documents. At the bottom of the final page, next to Liam's bold, aggressive signature, was her own name, Olivia Thorne. It was done. The Elias Trust was secure. Marcus Sterling's empire was facing a massive, very public collapse without the land to bridge his resort. The nightmare was over. But as she sat in the quiet house, a new, completely different kind of tension coiled in her stomach. She heard Liam's heavy footsteps approaching from the hallway. He walked into the kitchen, having showered and changed into clean, dark clothes. He stopped when he saw her looking at the papers. "My lawyer's confirmed receipt," Liam said, his voice quiet in the cavernous room. "It's ironclad." "Thank you," Olivia said, tracing her finger over her new signature. She looked up at him. "You saved my life, Liam. And I don't just mean legally. You reminded me that I have a spine." Liam moved closer, resting his hip against the edge of the island. The physical distance between them was practically non-existent. The air crackled, thick with the unspoken gravity of what they had just done. "You always had a spine," Liam murmured, his pale eyes tracking her every movement. "They just buried it under a mountain of expectations. I didn't give you anything you didn't already own." Olivia stood up. She didn't retreat. She stepped into his space, tilting her head back to meet his gaze. The scent of pine and clean rain enveloped her. "Caroline said you didn't want me," Olivia whispered. The vulnerability she had hidden all day finally surfacing. "She said you just wanted to beat Marcus." Liam's eyes darkened. A flash of pure, territorial heat igniting in the pale, gray depths. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out. His large, rough hands cupped her face, his thumbs gently brushing over her cheekbones. "Caroline is a fool," he said, his voice dropping to a rough, gravelly whisper that made her knees weak. "I didn't walk into that ballroom to spite Marcus Sterling. I walked in there because I saw a woman who was worth more than the entire room combined, letting a bunch of cowards tell her she was nothing." His gaze dropped to her lips, and Olivia's breath hitched. "I didn't marry you for a piece of land, Olivia," Liam confessed, the raw, brutal honesty of his words echoing in the quiet room. "I married you because the moment you took my hand in that ballroom, I knew I was never going to let it go." A soft, shattered gasp escaped Olivia's lips. All the pain, all the rejection, all the feelings of inadequacy she had carried for 3 years evaporated under the searing heat of his gaze. She wasn't rejected 7 times because she was broken. She was rejected so that she would end up right here, on this mountain, with the one man strong enough to hold her. She reached up, tangling her fingers into his thick, dark hair. "Then don't let go," she breathed. Liam didn't hesitate. He pulled her flush against his massive chest, lowering his head, and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle, polite kiss. It was hungry, desperate, and entirely consuming. It was the collision of 2 people who had found sanctuary in the wreckage of each other's lives. Olivia kissed him back with equal ferocity, wrapping her arms around his neck, finally anchoring herself to the one thing in the world that was real. Outside, the wind howled across the jagged peaks of the Blackwood Range. But inside the fortress of glass and timber, the storm had finally passed. The Mountain King had found his queen, and the world below would never touch them again. She was rejected 7 times. Olivia's journey reminds us that the world's definition of our worth is often a calculated lie. True value isn't found in the approval of those who seek to use us, but in the fierce, unyielding strength we discover when our backs are against the wall. Sometimes you have to endure the wrong doors closing so the universe can push you toward the right one. If this story of finding power in vulnerability, overcoming toxic manipulation, and discovering a fiercely protective love resonated with you, please leave a like. Hit the share button to send it to a friend who needs to hear this message. And subscribe for more gripping, high-stakes cinematic romance.